So in this video we're going to be taking a look at this device here, the Trimui Smart Pro, which is a pocket emulation device. We're going to be taking a closer look at the external design, the features and the sort of games you'll be playing with this device. So what actually is the Trimui Smart Pro? Well, it's a PS Vita looking handheld device which allows you to emulate games from a handful of retro consoles including PlayStation Portable, DS, Game Boy, Nintendo 64, so there's a whole bunch of games you're able to play on this device. But anyway, we're going to start this video off with a look inside the box. So the company Mechdiy, I'm probably saying that wrong, sent over this bundle with the Trimui Smart Pro console as well as a carrying case, which is very kind of them. So the Trimui Smart Pro comes in a pretty standard box. It looks like this. Upon opening the box, you're greeted with an instruction manual. So the Trimui Smart Pro comes in a bag with a bit of foam in front of it. It also comes with a plastic screen protector that we're going to peel off. And finally, at the bottom of the box, there is a USB-C cable for charging the device. This bundle also came with a very nice 128GB SanDisk micro SD card. It's very nice to see that they included such a large micro SD card. That does come preloaded with hundreds of games, and I did actually think it was very nice that they included a SanDisk branded micro SD card because that's a fairly decent brand. And I do know that a lot of these pocket handheld devices do come with fairly cheap micro SD cards which are prone to breaking. An example of that is my Mechdiy Mini, which came with some random off-brand micro SD card which did eventually stop working. So I do think it is very nice that they did decide to include a high quality micro SD card in the box. So I did also mention that it was Mechdiy that sent out this device, so thank you to them. They've also sent out their own branded carrying case, which is actually very high quality. So Mechdiy is an online store that sells these emulation devices, so if you are interested in buying anything, there'll be a link to their website in the description below. And also if you use the code GYM16, you'll get 16% off on their store, so thank you very much to Mechdiy. Let's get on with the video. So to a lot of you, the design of the Trimui Smart Pro should be familiar. It does look a bit like a PlayStation Vita or a PSP or even a Nintendo Switch Lite. But I do think the overall design of this emulator is very nice, and I do particularly like the color that I chose, which is a retro looking gray with some purple buttons. So in terms of specs, the Trimui Smart Pro has a 5-inch 720p IPS display, which is actually fairly sharp and responsive for the price and size of this device. Powering the Trimui Smart Pro is a 1.8 GHz quad-core processor paired with a 660 MHz GPU. It also comes with 1GB of LPDDR4X RAM. So this level of performance will allow you to emulate all the way up to about PlayStation Portable level of graphics. So we're now going to take a quick look at the external design and build quality of the Trimui Smart Pro. As you can see, when compared to the Nintendo Switch Lite, the Switch Lite is a little bit bigger, but the overall layout and design is fairly similar between these two devices. So having a look at the front of the device, it has two joysticks. It's also got a menu button, select and start button. So it's also got a D-pad and some action buttons. The labeling of the action buttons, Y, X, B and A, are the same as Nintendo layout, so it's the same as a DS, Nintendo Switch. So in my opinion, the buttons on the front of this device do feel very nice to press. They're clicky, but there isn't a lot of travel, so it's all down to personal preference. Surprisingly, from what I've seen online, the joysticks are actually a little bit controversial. I think it's mainly to do with the design and functionality of the joysticks. So as you can see, they're slightly recessed into the body of the device, which unfortunately for some people will make them uncomfortable. That's what I've heard online. But in my opinion, I don't mind these joysticks. I don't think they're particularly uncomfortable. They're definitely not as precise as something like an Xbox or a PlayStation controller where the joystick is much larger, but for a portable device I think they get the job done, and it's better than not having these joysticks in my opinion. The front surface of the joystick is rubberized, so that helps with grip. My main complaint with these joysticks is that there isn't an L1 and an L2 functionality, so you're unable to click down on these joysticks and have them act as separate buttons. I think that does limit the sort of emulation potential of this device, because there are a lot of consoles that have joysticks that allow you to press down on them. But the lack of L1 and L2 functionality isn't the end of the world. As I mentioned, this only really emulates up to about PlayStation Portable level of graphics. You weren't able to press down on the joystick on the PlayStation Portable, so I don't think it's that big a deal. It's just nice that they included joysticks. For example, my Mechdiy Mini, obviously this is a completely different style of device, but this doesn't have any joysticks. It just relies on buttons and a D-pad. If you like the bumper buttons and the trigger buttons of the Nintendo Switch, then you probably will like the bumper buttons and the trigger buttons of the Trimui Smart Pro, because they're almost identical. They're a similar sort of design. The top of the device includes a power button, some volume rockers, and one of 2 USB-C ports found on this device. From what I've read, the USB port on the top, labelled host, is for connecting to USB accessories, whereas the USB-C port on the bottom, labelled DC, is for charging. On the bottom of the device there is a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as a slot for a micro SD card. There's also the DC USB-C charging port for charging the device. There's also this small black rectangle that says Trimui on it. I don't think it serves any purpose. But next to that there's an FN switch, which I presume is a function switch that you can program to do various different things. And finally there's a small hole on the corner for a lanyard. In the hand, the Trimui Smart Pro does feel comfortable to hold. You'll also be happy to know that it does feel well made. There's no obvious creaking in the body of the console when you try and bend it. Yeah, it does feel solid and well put together. So before we test some games on the Trimui Smart Pro, if you are enjoying this video, be sure to check out my channel and consider subscribing. I've had a look at my analytics and about 1% of my viewers are actually subscribers. So if you are enjoying and you want to see more, consider subscribing. I make regular tech videos and we have just hit 5,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. Anyway, let's get on with the video. So here it is. Here's the Trimui Smart Pro. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's using some software called CrossMix OS, which I've actually found to be quite good. So as you can see at the top of the screen, it has a menu, so it has favorites, recent. It has a best tab, which allows you to scroll through different collections of games. So it's got Mario, Sonic, Zelda. If you move right again, it has a tab called Game, and it allows you to choose which console you want to emulate. There are absolutely loads of consoles to choose from. It even has PSP, PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Game Boy, Game Boy Advanced, Game Boy Color. So as you can see, this device does come with loads of games pre-installed. We're going to test some of them out. So here we have Little Big Planet, a very popular PlayStation Portable game loaded onto this console. And we're just going to test it out. So right away I am actually very impressed. It does run the game almost perfectly. This is definitely very playable. So what I've noticed is there are a few frame drops. So I wouldn't say it's as good of an experience as an actual PlayStation Portable, but it's not far off. And I would say if you are just playing casually, you probably won't notice the difference. But I am noticing there are some minor frame drops, nothing too severe, but it is worth me just mentioning that. Quickly before I forget, I just want to mention the battery. So this does have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery packed inside of it, which is actually quite large. It's as large as most modern smartphones, and Trimui state that you'll get about 5 hours of playtime from this battery. We're now going to try a different game. This is Mario 64, which is a game for the Nintendo 64, and it actually runs perfectly on this device. As you can see, it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, so it's cut off both of the sides because this is a wide angle screen. But in terms of the way this game plays on this device, it runs pretty much perfectly. I haven't got any complaints. The controls do feel a little bit weird, but with some tweaking I think you can get this pretty much perfect. I've got no complaints when it comes to the screen. I think it's reasonably sharp and fairly bright. It's bright enough for indoor play at least. The only thing I do want to say is the speakers, although there are 2, so it technically should be stereo, they're not the best speakers I've ever heard. They do sound a little bit tinny, so that is something to be aware of. I'm not super impressed with the speakers, but they do the job. I next tried playing a Nintendo DS game on this device. As you can see, this is Lego Batman on the Nintendo DS. Unfortunately, I have run into some issues whilst playing this game. The main one being is this device doesn't have a touch screen, so to emulate the touch screen they use the joystick to sort of move a cursor around the touchscreen. Although this is playable from sort of like a performance frame rate point of view, I think the controls do feel a little bit clunky. This definitely wouldn't be the first device I would pick to emulate Nintendo DS. As you can see, the controls are a bit odd. It's not the best experience. We're next going to test out GT Adventure 3 on the Game Boy Advanced. Yeah, that game runs absolutely fine. So I've just noticed something. If you scroll past games to apps, there are now some apps that you can use. Something that I did notice is there is actually a screen recorder. There is also a net play tab and a settings tab. So you can adjust the screen brightness, the volume, but you can also use this to adjust the volume. It's also got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So I've seen people connect third-party controllers to this if you want to use a different sort of controller to play games. So in conclusion, should you pick up the Trimui Smart Pro for game emulation? In my opinion, I think it is a very nice device. It fits very nice in the hand. It's got more of a PS Vita style design. So if that's something you're looking for, this is a great option. So the only downsides I've found with this device is it sometimes struggles to play certain PlayStation Portable games. And just by the design of this console, it struggles to play Nintendo DS games, but that's mainly because it doesn't have a touchscreen. So I definitely do think you should consider this console if you're in the market for an emulation console that looks like a PSP. On the other hand, if you're not looking for a device that looks like a PlayStation Portable, then you might be interested in something like the Mechdiy Mini, which looks a bit like an old Game Boy. Hopefully you've enjoyed this quick overview on the Trimui Smart Pro. If you have enjoyed, be sure to check out my channel and consider subscribing. And if you do want to pick up one of these devices, check out the link in the description and use my promo code here to get 16% off.